Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's last webinar in this four-part series called Yellowstone Perspectives, hosted by the Yellowstone Gateway Museum. This series, along with new museum exhibits, which will open over the next 2 summers, commemorate the 150th birthday of Yellowstone National Park, the world's first national park. My name is Diane Chalfant, and I am a volunteer and board member of the Yellowstone Gateway Museum here in Livingston, Montana. Our museum is a tremendous resource for our community, and so much of it can be accessed online. Beyond these webinar programs, the Yellowstone Gateway Museum also offers a fascinating digital photo archives, online exhibits, and research services. If you're not currently a member, we really encourage you to become a member of the Yellowstone Gateway Museum and explore more about the rich natural and cultural heritage of Park County, Montana. In a moment, I'll introduce the museum's curator and one of our featured writers, Karen Reinhart. But first, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so that you'll know how to participate in tonight's program. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our presenters. And your questions will be anonymous. To submit a question, just go to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. I'll read the questions and share them with our artists. As time allows, our presenters will address as many of the questions as they can after the presentation. We are recording this webinar and we'll upload it to Yellowstone Gateway Museum's YouTube channel after the event. On YouTube, you'll be able to watch this program again. You'll be able to watch any of the programs that we've done online over the last 2 years, and it's quite a collection, so I hope that you'll have a chance to look at some of the other programs as well. And finally, following the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to take a very brief survey, and we hope you'll take that survey because it'll help us improve this and others. I'd now like to introduce Yellowstone Gateway Museum's curator, artist, and writer, Karen Reinhart. Karen?
Thank you, Diane. It's my job now and my delight to announce tonight's speaker. Katie Shepherd Christiansen is an artist, naturalist, and conservationist. She is artist in residence at the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative in Jackson, Wyoming, and principal of Coyote Art and Ecology. Katie completed her graduate studies at Yale School of the Environment, focusing her research on Yellowstone's biophysical, cultural, and political contexts. For her commitment to the region, Katie received the prestigious recognition as a WIS Conservative Scholar for the American West. She was recently awarded the 2022 Patty Laser Greater Yellowstone Creative Writing and Journalism Fellowship presented by the Wyoming Arts Council. Katie's artwork appears in parks and natural areas across the Yellowstone region, including Bozeman's Story Mill Community Park, Jackson's Astoria Hot Springs Conservancy, and in Paradise Valley's West Creek Ranch. She is a 2-time recipient of National Endowment for the Arts funding and has collaborated with various organizations, including the Trust for Public Land, City of Bozeman, Gallatin Watershed Council, Sacagawea Audubon Society, UCross Foundation, Leave No Trace, the Wild Foundation, and National Geographic. Katie is a contributing columnist to Mountain Journal and illustrates books, including the recently released Atlas of Conflict Resolution, a Montana field guide to sharing ranching landscapes with wildlife. Her next book project is a seasonal almanac to the Greater Yellowstone, intending to help to reconnect local people to the land, to wild communities, and to each other by bringing to life the cyclical, concurrent happenings of our ecosystem in word and illustration. Katie grew up in northern Michigan and is the mother of 2 young rascals who remind her to slow down and be curious. And special guest artist Jenni Lowe-Anker and DG House and writers Elise Atchinson and myself will be introduced later. Please welcome Katie Christensen.
Thank you so much, Karen, and Diane, thank you as well for your introduction. Thank you to Yellowstone Gateway Museum for hosting this speaker series and for inviting me and this amazing panel of women to speak on behalf of this community project that that is a celebration of Yellowstone's wilds, a celebration of our local art community, and a book that demands that there is an intrinsic value to this world-renowned ecosystem. It's my honor tonight to get to facilitate a conversation amongst these four women. And I imagine that those of you joining us tonight are looking forward to that time too. We will get there soon, a conversation with DG, Jenni, Elise, and Karen. I want all of us to know that these women are not just experts in their crafts, but I see them and admire them for their wisdom, for their determination, for their advocacy for Yellowstone's wild. I don't mean it lightly that this is an honor. These are women who are role models and to whom I look up to in my own work. So it's really special to get to bring us together tonight and have this conversation together. What I'm hoping to get out of a discussion is to really understand what underpins each of their crafts as writers and artists. So what it means to live in Greater Yellowstone, how that shapes their art and writing, and then in reverse, kind of how their storytelling and how storytelling more broadly in this region can help to shape Greater Yellowstone's future. I think it will be a fruitful conversation. And I imagine we will all take some nuggets of wisdom with us and I'm sure inspiration as well. So soon I will provide their bios as well as turn the floor to them. First, though, I'd love to set the stage for our conversation and really provide context for what is bringing us together tonight, which is this communal effort in celebration of this place that is our home. As I speak to the context of the book and the background of the book, I'm going to be flipping through some of the artwork that was created for the project. So let me get that up for us. And I hope you enjoy. Let's begin here. I created the Artist Field Guide to Yellowstone in celebration of Greater Yellowstone, its wildlife, its community of passionate artists and writers, and its legacy as this unique place in our modern world where intact wild nature coexists among human communities. This coexistence, this weaving, this integration of people and wildlife on shared land was very much an influence to the format of this project, which is organized like a field guide, but is fleshed out with the diverse artwork and illustration and is told in prose and in poetry by local voices. The book's storytellers are 50 of the region's most renowned artists and writers, individuals whose stories come together in a layered narrative of Greater Yellowstone, providing readers with meaningful opportunities to connect with this place, its wildness, and its people. Greater Yellowstone offers a landscape for making meaning in one's life. The book offers stories to help make sense of this landscape in ways that are aligned with a sustainable future for human and wild communities alike. We took care to create and design this book so that in its simple beauty, it would reflect the aesthetics of the ecosystem itself. This is based on a concept, which I hope we can discuss later, that art, which conveys the beauty of the natural world, can serve as a foundation for building values around ecologically rich systems. The book reinforces that this intact ecosystem, one rich with wildlife, is beautiful in its completeness, in its wholeness. And in this way, the book provides a pathway for readers to connect with a deeper sense of their place within this wild nature. For those who have not yet seen the book in person, I thought it would be helpful to step into the page together briefly and see how this weaving of art, writing, and natural history plays out on actual pages of the book. If you happen to have a copy with you, we are opening to the Pica, which is page 20. I love this page. This bold and colorful pica was painted by our one and only DG House. DG, of course, will be speaking with you soon. When I look at your painting here, which you've entitled Little Big Medicine, I feel a drumming of energy from this vivacious yet tiny pica. To accompany DG's painting is a poem by Lynn Dalebout. Lynn, who was a legendary Yellowstone wordsmith. And she created a war cry for the Ochotona Princeps, which is the scientific name for the pica. She begins, "We are called the Ochotona, creatures of purpose and place. No hibernation, no migration, our purpose to stay in one place." So Lynn here is giving voice to the pica in a rhythmic call that echoes DG's painting. They both play like this drum beat, and they register with fierceness, with solidarity. Also on this page, you will notice maybe more traditionally thought of natural history elements. These illustrations, which I created, include the pica on the left sidebar, who is peering across the centerfold to a lupin, which is one of a pica's favorite snacks. And then that left sidebar also shares some, again, maybe more traditional natural history interpretation of this species. One quote, "In mountainous terrain, listen for a shrill mewing chirp to locate the round-eared, short-tailed pica swiftly darting across talus slopes." So this book continues on in this way, this weaving together of stories, of artwork, of illustration. And the storytellers are those people who have dedicated their lives to telling Yellowstone stories. 50 contributors, 4 of whom are with us tonight. And without further ado, I think we should turn it on over to them. So DG House, we just saw her pica painting. Jenni Lowe-Anker created the book's opening Peaceable Kingdom painting. Elise Atchinson penned an essay about the lynx, and Karen Reinhart took on the most diverse of species, which was the thermophilic bacteria. First, we're going to be speaking with our artists, DG and Jenni, a little bit about them. DG House is a guest artist in both Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks, and was recently named the first honorary ranger for Grand Teton National Park. Amazing. Her contemporary Native American artwork has exhibited in fine art museums across the country. House is an enrolled member of the Cherokee tribe of Northeast Alabama, and I'm so sorry, lives in Bozeman, Montana, along the Gallatin River. Jennifer Lowe-Anker was born and raised in Montana and has resided in Bozeman for 30 years as a professional artist. Her paintings depicting wildlife, birds, and Western landscapes are well known in the region. She is author of Forget Me Not, a memoir that tells the story of her life with the late Alex Lowe and her current husband, Conrad Anker, both world-renowned mountaineers. It's such a pleasure, Jenni and DG, to have you here tonight. We're first going to actually work with Jenni to take a look at her painting. And doing this is because the Peaceable Kingdom is what opens this book. So let's take one more look at it together. You all saw it, but here it is again in all of its glory. Jenni knows this is a very special piece to me. While we look at it, I thought I would just read a very brief excerpt from the preface that I wrote to accompany it. There is no escaping the wild in Yellowstone. Here, even a glancing look around is enough to drum up those timeless, unnerving questions. Who are you, wild other, and who am I? Who are you, wild other, and who am I? Jenni, I brought the concept of this field guide to you many years ago now, and instead of selecting a species, you suggested painting a peaceable kingdom, which couldn't have been more perfect. And I had no idea, of course, at the time. Would you let us all know in on your thought process of identifying the Peaceable Kingdom as the right piece for inclusion in this project and the historical significance of this painting.
Thank you, Katie. It's such an honor to be here tonight with all of you fine women and artists, and to be sharing this whole voyage, you know, to celebrate our wild places here in Montana and Wyoming in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. So the Peaceable Kingdom was, in my mind, you know, a piece. It was a piece that had been done years ago by many people. Edward Hicks was one artist in America who did something like 60 versions of the Peaceable Kingdom. And the original idea was taken from the Bible, from Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. And so it was the idea of peace on earth, you know. And I always, from the time I was a young child, felt as though all of the species mattered as much as humans, and perhaps even more. And so the idea of a balanced and peaceful ecosystem is something that has always intrigued me. And it's like, it's an iconic piece, you know, the whole, you know, old historic imagery of the lion laying down with the lamb or whatever. But for me, you know, having our Peaceable Kingdom feature the iconic species of our area, they're all large species. There is one little pika in there. There's one owl, which I consider the wisdom flying overhead. And it's sort of the wisdom of how important each and every species is in an ecosystem, and that balance of nature, which we as humanity have disrupted, you know. And I think that, you know, there are places still on the planet where it's less disrupted, but I kind of realized at a very young age that somehow I didn't feel like I quite fit in with the rest of the ecosystem. And so to me, you know, each of those species that are represented in my piece are kind of saintly, and I treasure them. And that's, you know, predators and prey and all the tiniest things, and including, you know, all of the species of life, whether it's right down to the tiniest things. And so that's my version. And I did, you might note in the piece that, you know, all of the animals are very calm, and, you know, I did that on purpose to make them quiet and calm, and relaxed looking. And I think that there is a peace of mind that comes from that.
You know, that touches on this thing I've been contemplating in anticipation of this conversation, and how one of the roles that artists and writers play, especially those who are artists and writers of nature, as the four of you are, is each of us are so connected to nature. It's a refuge for each of us. And through art and writing that is kind of aimed this way, we can offer that refuge to a greater community, to a broader audience. And to me, Jenni, your piece is an excellent representation of that, of a refuge, not only for the species that you represent and those characters in the painting in and of itself, but to viewers, to sink into that peaceful feeling that you conveyed through each of those species. And I wonder if you could speak to the refuge that you find in nature, and if you see yourself playing a role, providing that refuge through your work for others.
Yes, I very much do. I think that whenever I create a piece, I'm thinking about, well, who is this going to touch, and how will it convey a message? And art conveys messages. That's what it does, whether it's written or visual or music, and or even dance. It's to convey a message to those who are viewing. And so knowing that it's people that are viewing my art and not other species, I think that, in general, I don't have very many of my works of art that have people in them. Usually if they do, it's a woman, and maybe that's because, from my viewpoint, I might be placing an image of myself in there, or maybe someone I want to be. But so those images are kind of whimsical too. Can be maybe someone riding on a wild bison, flying through the sky or something like that. But yes, my intent is, for people to find joy in the images of nature, and perhaps, find through that joy more value in protecting and saving them. So I guess that would be my purpose. And certainly I think that just having communicated with a lot of the people who own or have my work, I think that everyone has a different idea of why they love certain pieces, but it's meaningful. It's meaningful for sure.
Thank you, Jenni. I am going to preface what I'm about to say with, I apologize for the background noise. My 10-month-old is trying to be put down to sleep without her mama for the first time in a while. So I will try to keep this brief and go back on mute. But Jenni, the other thing that makes me think of is that your work and that kind of representation of refuge goes beyond just, connection to nature and therefore nature awareness and appreciation, but it actually provides nourishment. As the viewer, it's like my nervous system is settled, I'm calmed, I'm brought back to a peaceful state, and then feel like I can go out and face the world again. And so I just, what you're doing has this ripple effect, and to me, there are layers to it that are really deep and really moving for the community.
Yeah. That's wonderful to hear. That's music to my ears. Thank you. And I feel that way when I'm in nature. It restores me for sure. When I go for a walk, or even, drive out through a wild place and look out at a mountain range, I'm like, oh, thank goodness there's still some wide open space and I can breathe. And so I'm happy that it provides that.
Yeah, I think it's building love, and then it's giving us the energy to take that love back out into the world. So it's empowering in that way. I wonder, Jenni, the Peaceable Kingdom, as you mentioned, is this art form that has depicted many ecosystems over its years. Within the context of Greater Yellowstone, the Peaceable Kingdom might represent coexistence. And do you, as someone who's lived here your entire life, you're a lifelong Montanan, Bozeman for 30 years, is coexistence something that you feel is a far-fetched reality, or rather an attainable vision for our future? Where do you fall on that spectrum, and how does your art help get us there?
Well, certainly living near Yellowstone Park and Glacier Park and wilderness areas like the Bob Marshall, where wildlife is protected, you know, those are great gifts. And just being able to know that, you know, I can get out the back door and get to a place where wildlife is safe and protected. But those are really tiny spaces, you know, compared to what the wildlife used to have when you consider how big, you know, our Western United States is, where all these species existed, and even out into the central part of our country. And so I, you know, I grieve for what they've lost. I grieve for each of these species. And I treasure, you know, the moments that I've gotten to see each and every one of these species. You know, the great horned owl is an icon of wisdom, and I have it kind of flying over the top and with its wings outstretched, you know, like almost over the top of, you know, all of those species there and all of the different animals that I've depicted. But I also, you know, and the mountains are in there, the stars and the moon, and you know, I don't have much except for grass down below, but we know what lives in the grass, and certainly, you know, that includes hundreds and probably thousands of things. But yes, I think of what was, and I think of what we need to save, and I don't know, you know, if it's doable at this point. You know, we're losing hundreds of species of life on Earth every year. It's really important that we pay attention and, you know, try hard to keep these sacred areas and maybe protect even more. So there's a lot of us that are out there trying to do that.
And what I hear you saying is that it's worth the fight. We're not ready to give up.
No, we are not giving up. No. And I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of people who are, even with the pandemic, just kind of discovering nature for their first time. I mean, we're all seeing it in the places where we live. And so my hope is that, you know, that tide will turn, and that that the voice will become greater to speak for these species that cannot speak for themselves.
That is a perfect transition. Thank you for setting me up for this transition over to DG, who DG, when I look at your pica, and I will pull her back up in a moment, but I think that's exactly what you've done, is you gave voice to the voiceless in your pica painting.
Well, I made sure that he, you know, that the iconic image of like the lion looking up. That's what I did on purpose. Pica. My idea was, you know, it's funny when you get the honor of being asked to be in a book like this, and I went for the pica, is what I wanted. Pica is so important to the story of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Their health and their well-being is a direct barometer to how the whole system is doing. Another reason I did it is, well, let me tell you this. I couldn't agree with Jenni more. When somebody asks me what my job is, and I think my job is twofold. It's to give voice to the wildlife and wildlands that don't have the predominant voice. But the second half is to remind you of how you feel in the natural world. And because I'm lucky enough to be artist in residence in you know, both of those national parks, I'm meeting people from around the world all the time and from a lot of cities. And so that's my goal for them, is to remember, don't forget who you're leaving behind when you go back to the city. And so I picked pika also because it's such a treat to find pikas for both the people that are able to climb and hike. It's part of it's when you know you're at a certain altitude, right? And if you can't do that, there's also places to drive to go up and see them. And they're loud and they're, you wish you could kiss one. Don't do it. Don't tell anyone I told you to do it. They're part of the rabbit family. They don't hibernate. So they're constantly getting their bedding and their food all the time. They're working all the time to keep that ecosystem going. That's what I'd want to say about the pika.
Well, she's lovely. Yeah, I wonder if you see yourself in the pika. And
oh my gosh, yes. Look at that. Yeah. A good friend of mine told me once that every portrait of every animal is also a self-portrait of yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons that Jenni's wildlife imagery is so kind and so lovingly done, because it's actually a self-portrait of her. And I'm sure it's true for me, because no matter what I paint, they're smiling. Every fish, every bear, if you look carefully. So I believe that's true. And of course, I'm bringing in a native perspective to this too. And I'm only speaking for my own people, but that border is reminiscent of parfleche. And if you know what parfleche is, I always like to teasingly call it Indian luggage from around here. The tribes around here that are associated with the park are nomadic. So they're not carrying heavy ceramics or whatever with them. So years ago, when I started my career, I decided to put this border on most all my paintings. And what it's for, it's a humbling for me and a way to acknowledge everyone before me and where I live. So I can tell you, it is time consuming, but it makes me slow down and remember my responsibilities to the wildlife, to the wildlands, and then to culture, right, too. So I think hard when I do this. So, and it also works as a frame, but and compositionally, but really it's more emotional than that. It's really about the tie to the park. I'm sure most everyone listening to this understands that there were native tribes in there long, long before it became a national park. We know the history. We know the original trails in and out. The tribes are not afraid of the water. They knew exactly what was going on. And even the sheep eater lived there full time. So I want to make sure that I always acknowledge that, even if it's subtly, in any painting that I do for this ecosystem.
DG, there's something you said there that I would love to understand more about, which is it seems you're very connected to the responsibility of being an artist. And yes, it's emotional. Your creation is emotional and probably very felt. But at the same time, in your head, there are all these ideas that you're trying to communicate that are pretty specific through your artwork. And I wonder, we have our audience viewing the pika right now. What do you imagine your work putting this pika together and the symbolism involved? What do you think that might convey to a viewer?
Park 41 years ago as a maid. I just wanted to get here, right? And 40 years ago in Grand Teton, and I have gone from the maid to the artist in residence in that time. And I am one of thousands of people that have done things like that love this place so much. they're all out there too every day. They're working at Forever Yellowstone. I'm sure you're watching, Cindy. I'm talking about you. They're working at the inn, serving you food. These people are also there to try to teach you something, you know, teach you too. But really, you all know we're the students, you know, when we're there. The story isn't about us. We're in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We're just lucky to see it. You know, the problem is when we mess up and do something wrong. But, you know, they're fine without us. No offense to any scientist out there, but I always laugh when I see sheep management area and I think they don't need you. But I get what they do. I totally get it. They're mostly managing people around the sheep. I hope that answers that question.
No, that was lovely. And I don't want to put Jenni on the spot. And yet, Jenni, I feel like DG offered an invitation when she said that every painting is from an experience. And I know you have a special pica experience that you might want to share if you want to share.
I would love to. So, you know, I started venturing into the mountains at a pretty young age as a teenager. And one summer I was in the little town of Polaris, and my grandmother was in her summer home, which is a log cabin built by her brother. And so I decided to climb with a friend up Mount Baldy, which sits kind of at the head of Billings Creek, and is a beautiful mountain covered in snow, usually at the beginning of summer. And so we went out and climbed up Baldy, and when, of course, we saw picas up there. You know, Polaris is at about 6,000 feet, so it wasn't too far up, you know, into the rocks and the talus, and we saw some picas. And when I came back down, the first thing my grandmother said was, "Did you see the little rock rabbits? They're so precious." She said, "When we were young, we went up Baldy, and it's the greatest thing that I remember is seeing the tiny little rock rabbits and how they made their haystacks, just like the haystacks that we had down in the valley." And she remembered them with the hay sticking out the sides of their mouths and seeing their tiny haystacks. And it was just a very magical thing for her. So
I love it.
yeah. Yeah, DG, I bet your grandma probably saw them too.
Oh yeah. I believe it or not, I am someone's grandmother. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm. You know, and Jenni,
you know, you're speaking exactly to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So a pica painting in your home.
Oh, I know.
Right.
And,
and
yeah.
imagine if we didn't live in Bozeman.
Yeah.
And we're in a high rise somewhere, and that pica painting, what that does for your soul and to your, what you would do to save the natural world because you were in it and saw it. That's a great example.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention about DG's piece, which I love, you know, I love that she has brought, you know, the history of her culture, you know, in the beautiful images that are framing the pica and the colors. And, you know, when I first look at them, you know, they remind me of stained glass windows, you know, in a church kind of, and like the animal is the saint in the middle of the window.
Love that. I love that.
Yeah.
You know, Jenni, I never said this before, but I have to share this with everyone. I was sitting at Old Faithful once as the artist. This is more than 20 years ago. And a man walks by, I think he was an angel. And as he went by, he said, only paint in the colors that appear in Yellowstone. And he was gone. So I researched and found the color palette of earth and paint for the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. Of course, I'm not painting in those. I'm painting in acrylics and oils. But that is why you see this palette behind me repeat my work, because every one of those colors appear in the ecosystem there. Somehow that's supposed to magically go in your soul, is what I hope.
It is. And I mean, we're that theme of refuge just came back too. Connecting with refuge in nature through artwork, no matter where you are, even if you're not in nature at that moment.
Mhm.
Experience. And then I also love that, Jenni, when we were chatting about your piece, you described the wildlife as saintly, and here we are seeing that same theme in your piece, DG. I want to let the audience know that Karen sadly lost her internet. So we're hoping that she can connect back in. But if that doesn't happen, we have plenty to fill the time with. So I do want to bring Elise into the conversation as our now resident writer. You got to hold the fort down yourself here, Elise.
She'll show up again.
Yeah, I think Karen's trying to connect. But so Elise, let me give your bio here for folks who don't know you. You have lived most of your life in an off-the-grid cabin on the edge of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness in Montana. You have a forthcoming book, as in next month, your book, Crazy Mountain, will be released. You're the recipient of the Eludia Book Award, as well as the Barbara Deming Award. Your short stories and essays have appeared in numerous journals, anthologies, radio, and elsewhere. It's awesome to have you here, Elise. You're
Great to be
impressive. Oh, good. You're an impressive woman, and someone who I think can add a lot to this conversation just in your sheer nature experience and how that ties into your translating of the natural world for readers. So what I'm hoping you'd be willing to do is to read an excerpt from your essay that you wrote for the book. And you took on the species, the lynx. The title of your essay, you gave The Land of the Lynx. And while you read your excerpt, what I'm hoping to be able to do is show the audience the painting that was made to accompany your essay. So this painting was done by Carrie Wilde, who is a Jackson Hole-based artist. And without further ado, Elise, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I love that painting too. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from the piece. I am more confident than I should be trudging through this frozen landscape. I snap photos of snow-laden trees, the bony limbs of the aspen bearing slender crescents of snow, the drooping branches of the Douglas fir bending but not breaking under the weight of winter. Tracks scamper along at the edge of the woods, the lopsided leaps of snowshoe hares and red squirrels, the frenzied dash and dive of the ermine, the three-pronged strut of the ruffed grouse venturing from the safety of brush. I read these snowglyphs the way some might read the Bible or Quran, awed by all that exists outside myself. A different story emerges at the edge of my snowshoe, and I stoop to examine the round and clawless print. Too big for a bobcat, too furry and light-footed for a mountain lion. The tracks move nimbly over the snowpack, the large splayed feet mimicking the flotation effect of my snowshoes, or more accurately, my snowshoes mimicking those oversized paws. I press a handprint into the snow beside the lynx print, and I look back at the awkward shuffling gait of my snowshoe tracks. The truth I so willingly forget is that without my snowshoes, I would sink to my thighs and flounder in the deep snow. Without my parka and insulated boots, I would become hypothermic in a matter of hours. We of the big-brained, opposable-thumbed clan never would have migrated north without learning how to synthesize the physical traits we weren't born with. Snowshoes to replace oversized paws, clothes and shelter to replace double-layered fur, arrows and traps to replace sharp teeth and retractable claws. No matter how badly I want to belong to this place, I know I wouldn't last long if I were dropped naked and alone in the land of the lynx. One broken snowshoe, one wet down coat or soggy match, and I might not return from this winter trek. Thanks.
Thank you. That I was there with you. I mean, that was excellent. And what I hear in that piece is your deep knowledge of place and of the community that you see as your neighbors, which are non-human life. You know, your knowledge of reading tracks, for example, is just must be a formative experience when you head out in nature to be able to not just be taking in things kind of at the superficial level, but actually read and understand the interactions and the occurrences at this more foundational level. And it's clear from that excerpt and the bio I read, you live this life that many of us will never experience, which is deep integration with deep, deep wild, where cougars and lynx are not uncommon companions. And I'd love to hear how you understand formative experiences in this wild place that you call home, how that has influenced your path as a writer.
So for me, place and writing have always been deeply integrated, as I think for most of the writers and artists in this book probably. And the two things that have been the biggest influence on both who I am as a person and as a writer have been all the years I've spent wandering in the backcountry, as well as all the years I've spent living on the land. So in the late 80s, we camped out in a tent and hand built a off-the-grid cabin. We're still working on it. That's a whole nother story. We picked the place we live because we can walk out our door and go up through the woods into the AB wilderness and could go all the way to Yellowstone without passing a road or a house. But there's nothing romantic about where we live. The winds are horrendous. It's one of the windiest places in our country. And the roads are really bad. You know, they're impassable for much of the year. And I live without a lot of modern conveniences, which not everybody wants to do. So, but there's a lot of wildlife, and that's because there's these large tracts of private and public land without houses, you know, around me. And I've had a lot of mountain lion experiences. Mountain lions have killed deer and elk right around us, and we've watched them feast, and we've watched them with their cubs and going back and forth from their kills. And I've run into them while hiking alone. And they haven't been the least bit faced by little old me, you know. And I've run into a lot of bears also with cubs and with their carcasses, and I've been charged by bears. And one time a bear stuck its head in my tent right before dark. And so I spent the night thinking about that bear. And but as Doug Peacock says, it ain't wilderness unless there's a critter out there that can kill and eat you. And I think what he's trying to say with that is that when you're in wild places, we aren't the top center people. We aren't the top center thing. You know, we're a small and sometimes edible part of the whole system, you know. And you know, the downside of knowing a place really well is that you see the ecological changes, you know, whether it's climate change or increase in recreation or subdivisions. You know, you're watching it, and you watch the place lose its biodiversity and its ecological connections, and it's a form of grief, you know, like losing a loved one, and you really are losing a loved one. But for me, writing can come out of that grief and out of that love. And we can kind of create new stories or retell our stories in ways that broaden the idea of community to not just human diversity, but also the non-human diversity. And I think those are the kind of stories we really need to move into the future. And I think those are the stories this wonderful little book tells. You know, there's so many great essays and art in here that is all about the community of non-humans that we live with. So
thank you. Yeah, at least that captures really well the intention behind the whole book effort. And what I had asked DG and kind of want to hear your perspective as a writer is the intention that you put into your process. And if knowing that you inhabit this land of the lynx, unlike many of your readers and the rest of the world, how do you go about translating that world for the rest of us, knowing that your voice is a very unique and important one in our greater understanding of this wild place?
So I don't really write, when I first write, I don't write with an intention like didactic or trying to come across, have a point. I more just write without thinking about it and see where I get with it. And like when it's nonfiction, I'm working off notes usually to get, and then I expand, about the species and whatnot. But I don't, it's in the revision where I come back and think, well, what am I trying to say with this, and what sort of point am I trying to get across? And really, I think it's, if your philosophy is, as the two, as DG and Jenni have already said, that we're a part of this much larger system. We're not, we're not the top of the system. If that's the way you think, that's going to come out in your writing without you intentionally putting it there. It just comes out. I think. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt you if there was more to say there. But yeah, as an artist and writer, reluctant to admit those two things, but myself, I think about process and the difference, between like a very intentional step-by-step engagement to say nature is important, and the other, which is maybe more heart-led, and potentially achieves the same end. Mm-hmm. I know that we're getting a little bit tight on time. I have a question for the group, but before that, Elise, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I was going to add to the Peaceable Kingdom idea. I think in a lot of what I write it's a peaceable kingdom with clause, and it's not necessarily the peace we think of when there's no violence, but it's where every creature in there has a place within the system, whether it's prey or predator or whatever. Yeah,
I like that. And what I love about what you said is our world is so human-centric, and it's just so great to feel like we can take the viewpoint of other species of life and try to look at the whole earth, from step into their shoes a little bit. I don't think people do that too much.
I think they see it through their own narrow focus.
Right.
And they can't really understand that there's this large world outside.
Yeah, like how does it affect me?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is for me, and it's for my pleasure and my use, but more like, wow, this animal is living here, or this species is living here, and what is their perspective? So it's pretty cool that you did that.
Yeah, and of course, Jenni and DG, you each are doing that through art as well. I mean, this is all this avenue for communicating what life is about, in my opinion, which is, connection to this greater world. And maybe we're more subtle than, this painting of a pika is all you need to know about life. But to me, there isn't anything more important than what the three of you do. The question that I have for the group, which I intended to be a thread through the conversation, I'm not sure I achieved that, but I hinted to it at the beginning. And that is, I have this belief that art and writing that conveys that an intact whole ecosystem is a beautiful thing. And if we use art and writing to develop concepts of beauty, that's another avenue towards achieving nature preservation or conservation, is this development of a shared value in beauty. And I wonder if you agree or disagree with my little thesis, and depending on that answer, how yourselves, and then maybe more broadly, this community of storytellers in which we are all a part, can continue to develop a concept of beauty in ecologically intact systems. Elise, why don't we start with you, and then DG and Jenni, you can pipe in.
So I definitely agree with what you're saying. And the way I see beauty, though, is I see beauty also in a gnawed carcass, or in, you know, a bird, a dead bird. I mean, it's all part of the system, you know, it's not just the pretty part. It's the whole thing that is beautiful, you know, to me. And I think when you get to that point, when you can see everything is beautiful, even the tough parts and the, you know, the hard parts, then, you know, you're appreciating the whole system rather than just what you want to see as beautiful. Because it's the death, the predators, there's a lot of hardship in nature, but it's all part of the system. It's all part of the way things work. And one thing feeds another, and then it gets, you know, like a lion carcass, the lion eats it and then it leaves. And then all these other creatures come in, the coyotes and the you know, the pine martens and the fox and then, you know, the mice and then the beetles and, you know, everything comes in and has its part in it. So even that carcass is beautiful, I think, because it's part of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we also start small, and that might be an apartment balcony. It might be a green space in the backyard. It certainly is city parks and state parks too. And the younger you are being taken to those places, it's the whole reason I came out west and whatever it was, 81 or whatever, was because of all my time camping in the state parks and being exposed to that. I bet if we go through every one of us here, somehow in our childhood, we were exposed, thank goodness, to the natural world. So I think we start the education of the beauty of the whole picture that way. Because I know there's people out there watching and they think, well, I don't have that. Well, there is a creek near you somewhere, or a river. There is something for you that you can find. And so that's what I'd say to it, is as early as you can take. And it's never too late.
Yeah. You're right, DJ. Every time I go to New York, I don't miss Central Park. It's a huge part of every visit I go there. And there's a kind of an incredible little ecosystem right in Central Park. Even though there's a lot of people that go through, there's parts of it that are kind of abandoned. And you know, and there's birds and there's little mini ecosystems everywhere.
Appreciation,
yeah.
Right? Respect. The sooner you can teach respect. You know, I not to get us off track, but there was an incident, of course, this week with a bison and a visitor. And all these years, I'm like, how do you teach this? It finally dawned on me, you can't teach this at the gate. You can't give a pamphlet and teach it. We have to take this story back again to respect at your you know, your local park, your whatever. And it's the same about education, educating people to beauty. You know, the earlier the better, but it's never too late.
Mm-hmm.
DG, that's exactly it. In my opinion, that culture and values shift towards this new mindset of who we are within this world, and the expectation that somebody stepping into the park for the first time will just suddenly be steeped in you know, everything we know here is outrageous. And yet the work that each of us are doing is preparing that person, so when they do step into the entrance, there is a foundation there that is deeper rooted in this knowing and this understanding. And that's what art and writing can do, is participate in the culture shift that we need to start making decisions that get us to that coexistence that we were talking about with Jenni at the beginning.
You know, when I was young, the ecology was a big part. It was, you know, way back when, and ecology was a big part of what they taught in school. And I think it's really gone down. They don't teach it as much as they did when it was first became popular. And that I like what DG said about it. We really have to start at young, you know, start with the youth.
I've also thought about how, what DG spoke about her little pica, and the poem that was with it, about living in the, just living in his place. And, he doesn't hibernate. He does his work right there and stays in his place. And as we saw in the pandemic, when so many of us were forced to stay in place, and we just kind of look in our backyards, I think, discovered for ourselves that, wow, maybe, this is kind of special wherever I am. And maybe that's not true for everyone, but you can often find things close to home that are precious, whether it's building a garden in your yard or on your rooftop apartment, or finding a new park that you haven't explored before, in your city, or, maybe just, taking a little road trip an hour away to a place you haven't really seen before close up and notice the species of birds that live there or something like that. And I think that, I'm a world traveler, and I do carry a certain amount of guilt with that because of climate change. And I also realize that, there's some places I'm not going to go see because I'm kind of cranking back my idea of, what's okay for me to travel, that I've already got my carbon footprint out there, and I need to try to make up for it. So in other ways. And I think we're just, there's so many of us, we just have to be really thoughtful about making sure that there is space for those other species.
Yeah, I mean, I mainly talked about, the charismatic lions and bears, but I'm just as awed by beetles and magpies. I could spend hours watching them. So, that's what you're saying, is looking at the small, and anywhere anybody is, there's wild somewhere to be amazed by.
Well, I feel like my thesis needs a slight revision, which is that something about that the representation needs to be in truth, because at least you presented that the beautiful is sometimes the ugly, or sometimes the messy.
Well, it's the whole system that I find beautiful.
Yeah, right. And DG, you brought up how it doesn't have to be what is our backyard, Yellowstone, to still be really important nature on many levels. And so that truth can play into that. I want to, so Karen can't make it, and we're so short on time, we're over time even. I would like to read the excerpt that Karen had prepared. Diane is going to ask one of the audience questions, and then we are probably going to close. So I hope some folks can stick around for this. My apologies, I wasn't prepared to read this excerpt, so if I stumble a little bit, I will try not to. So Karen's essay is entitled Thermophilic Bacteria, Tiny Threads in the Yellowstone Tapestry. And I'm not going to try to multitask. And yet, what I would love to do while I read this is show you the artwork that was made for her essay by Kay Stratman. Kay is an incredible watercolor artist based in Jackson. She was recently awarded the something along the lines of the Best Wyoming Artist Award, something grand and profound as her artwork. So anyway, I'll try to flip through these as I read. She created 4 tiles for this. To fully understand the complexity of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, with its many species such as bear, bison, cutthroat trout, and whitebark pine, we must unravel the story of its microscopic building blocks. Microbial communities living at the edge of hot springs provide the nearly invisible foundation vital to the entire ecosystem. The park's geothermal basins harbor more intricate stories than merely the colors, shapes, and textures that inspire an artist's stroke or a photographer's eye. Heat-loving and thermophilic bacteria often coexist in a dance of layer upon layer of diversity, forming a biotic community known as a mat, while adapting to and thriving in one of the park's most extreme environments. Some species migrate or alter their map pigmentation, responding to temperature or seasonal fluctuations. As water flows away from a spring and cools, different species of microbes are able to live at different temperatures, indicated by colors that change from red to orange, yellow, green, and then brown. A thermal area is an artist's palette, serving as a barometer of life. Beauty in the basins is not random. And then the last paragraph of her essay. Imagine the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem as a woven tapestry. Its many threads of different colors, textures, and hues represent the ecosystem's myriad species. Perhaps the most crucial and overlooked element of this tapestry are its tiny threads, the microscopic organisms that support the entire system. Tug on a thread, large or small, and it affects the whole picture, indeed, the integrity of the weave. The tiny threads of thermophilic bacteria will continue to delight the visitor and artist while quietly maintaining the delicate fabric that is the Greater Yellowstone. So Karen, I'm sorry that you couldn't be here to read that, but thank you for your contribution and for facilitating this whole event. And Diane, is there some audience questions or maybe one that you want to pose?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you. I mean, this has been a fascinating and inspiring discussion, and we're really sorry Karen couldn't join us. There are thunderstorms occurring where she is. So, but what's interesting is we're looking at some of the audience questions, and it's clear that there are several artists in the audience. And so we're going to just pick one, and this artist happens to be a musician, but the question I think is kind of universal. The person says, I'm still new to the Yellowstone area, having only worked 2 seasons. I make music about my Yellowstone experiences, but I don't know what to do with it yet. What do you recommend for new artists in getting connected here?
Well, it's a lot easier now than it was 30 years ago, I can tell you. You know, the internet can be a wonderful thing when you use it correctly. So, you know, you join other musicians, you go out of the house, you take chances, you get a hand up from people that have already started. You believe, and the main thing is you don't quit. That's it. That's how you're a success. You don't quit.
Yeah, and you can have an audience of a bunch of friends and enjoy playing, you know, for family, friends, or you can go a little further and check out your local bar, get in there, you know, deliver your message, you know. Yeah, you got to put yourself out there if you're an artist. It's all there is to it, or a writer or a musician.
What I would add is the value of collaboration and maybe finding another artist who isn't a musician, maybe a visual artist or a dancer or a writer, and explore ways the two of you can create something together and empower each other and lift each other up through that experience, which I have to say, you know, this book is what that's been, is the ultimate collaboration. And it's been empowering for me, and I hope for others involved to get to work together and to bring our best talents to this, knowing that others get to fill in the spaces.
We've had people curious about how to get a copy of the book, so we want to be sure before we end the program tonight. You can get the book at Elk River Books here in Livingston. You can certainly get it at the Yellowstone Gateway Museum, the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, and throughout Yellowstone National Park. So plenty of places to get a copy of this book. And before we close out tonight, are there any last words that any of our artists would like to share?
I'd like to say that it is an incredible honor to work with this level of talent, that everyone in this book, and especially this panel, Who would have guessed
Oh,
when I
geez.
drove up 4 years ago? Who would have guessed?
I feel the same way. And I have to say also that Katie, I think I'm trying to remember how long ago it was that I got introduced to you, maybe 6 years ago or something. You weren't married, didn't have any children.
No children,
And,
that's for sure.
and you had this idea, you know, and I think you were still in grad school. I'm not, and I love it that, you know, you shared your idea with me that I want to do this thing. And, you know, would you be interested to be part of it? And I was like, sure. Yeah, that's great. You know, and then it's so rewarding to see it come to fruition and to be out there and to see all of the artists who participated and, you know, the beautiful end result of that vision that you had. Yeah.
Thank you,
It
Jenni.
really becomes something totally different when you take you take writing and art and put it together, take writing and music. It really becomes a whole nother genre, really. And it's just, I love what you did with this book. It's beautiful. But everybody did with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Thank
going
you.
to slip
Yeah,
one more question in here just because multiple members of our audience have asked, and that is, how do you become an artist in residence or a writer in residence?
Well, for the national parks, there's almost a program in every single one of them, and they're all different. You might even work for a concessionaire, or you might be working with the Park Service. So I'm working with the concessionaire in Yellowstone. I'm just going to tell you personal, but I work for the National Park Service as a volunteer, is how they categorize it, to be artists there. The one job is for enrolled Native Americans only. The other one is regional artists specializing in Yellowstone. But I don't know of a single national park that doesn't have an artist in residency program. Some, there's no money involved, but you stay a month in a provided house. Some are stipend. Some you have to give a piece to the government at the end. They're all different. And you just go online. You
Just
work,
contact the
you
park
get your
and ask.
samples, and you ask and you apply.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Katie, last words?
my last words are in response to what the three of you said, which were very, very kind words about the project. And I feel that I am standing on the shoulders of giants. And for whatever reason, all three of you said, yes, let's do this crazy thing. And I'm so grateful for that. Thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. It's been really fun.
And on behalf of Yellowstone Gateway Museum, thank you to all of the artists, and thank you to our audience who've been with us for many programs over the last couple of years. And this is the end of the Yellowstone Perspectives series. Good night, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Mm.